Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Our mission, as always, is to give you that shortcut to being deeply informed. We take a whole stack of sources and really boil them down for you.
And today, we are tackling a big one, a really big one.
We are. Today's deep dive is into one of the most visible, and I think it's fair to say, controversial religious practices in the world, the hijab.
That's right. And what's really crucial to understand about the sources we're looking at today is that they offer an explicitly internal perspective. It's all rooted very deeply in Islamic philosophy.
Right, so we're kind of setting aside the external political debates for a moment.
Exactly. We're focusing entirely on the argument that the hijab represents freedom, protection, and is what's called an inherent inclination, or fitra.
And these sources, they don't ease into it, do they? They start with a pretty provocative scenario.
No, they jump right in. They start with this thought experiment. So picture this. An atheist girl, someone completely secular, decides to wear a head covering.
For whatever reason. Maybe she just likes how it looks, or, she's having a bad hair day.
Right. And the source asks, if someone tried to stop her from doing that, what would the reaction be? Society would, universally call it an attack on her freedom.
Of course. Her body, her choice.
But here's the challenge they pose. Why is that freedom so fiercely defended? But when a woman chooses to cover based on her deeply held philosophy, a philosophy she finds through Islam, there's often this intense opposition.
It's a critique of hypocrisy, then. The argument is that society only supports the freedom of non-religious choices while kind of punishing informed religious ones. It completely flips the narrative.
It really does.
So to get started, we need that core definition they provide. Hijab, in this context, means covering certain parts of the body as commanded by Allah, and also preventing the body's curves from being exposed.
And that's key. It's not just about a piece of cloth.
Okay, let's unpack this. We're really looking at the purpose, the whole philosophical logic behind it.
And that logic is all based on this concept of fitra, the idea that this isn't some arbitrary rule. It's meant to align with let's say, the core programming of men and women, their natural state.
And when you violate that design...
The sources argue that's when you get unhappiness. You get societal friction.
So the hijab becomes less of a rule and more of an operating manual for being human.
That's a great way to put it. And the first way they illustrate this is by putting the whole practice in direct opposition to, modern culture.
Right. Their first critique is a big one. It's about how our society defines and sells beauty.
It's a total takedown. They come out swinging with data, citing 2020 statistics where, get this, $16.7 billion was spent on cosmetic procedures in the U.S.
$16.7 billion.
I mean, it's a staggering number. And the source's interpretation is what's so critical here. They see it as a measure of this deep internalized feeling of not being enough.
It's a symptom of a psychological wound.
A massive one, yes. They argue that modern culture has created a standard of beauty that is, and I'm quoting here, far from reality. They point to things like, the Barbie doll physique, which is anatomically impossible.
Or just scrolling through social media with all the filters and perfect images.
Exactly. The woman who is constantly comparing herself to these things is basically forced to conclude, I am ugly and insufficient.
And from that feeling, the source says she's pushed down one of two very damaging paths.
Path one is all internal. She just thinks everyone sees her as ugly, which can lead to really serious psychological issues, even depression. It violates that inner peace fitra is supposed to protect.
And the second path?
Is external. To avoid that pain of feeling ugly, she becomes they use the word slave to other people's desires. She feels she has to uncover herself as much as possible.
Changing her body, maybe even sacrificing her values, just to fit this mold.
It's a life lived completely in reaction to what other people think.
And the hijab, in this framework, is the declaration of independence from all of that.
Precisely. Islam, the source says, tells a woman, you are superior, above anyone's judgment of whether you are beautiful or not. The Creator made you with a special, unique beauty.
So by choosing to cover, she's essentially saying, my worth isn't up for public debate. I'm not playing by your commercialized rules.
I'm reserving my beauty for myself and for my husband. It's about prioritizing her own values.
And that idea of prioritizing loyalty brings us right to the second big theme. How covering is meant to preserve the family unit.
Yes, the institutional role. They connect it directly to what, pretty much any marriage counselor would tell you.
The three pillars: trust, love, and respect.
Right. A woman's fitra, her nature, is to seek a man she feels safe and happy with. A man wants to trust his wife and build something solid.
And to protect that trust, Islam mandates what the source calls double protection.
I found this part fascinating. It's a two-pronged approach.
And what's really interesting is the order they present it in. The first layer of this protection, this covering, is actually for men.
Yes. They cite the 30th verse of Surah Nur, which commands men to lower their gaze. In essence, it's about covering their eyelids, controlling their attention.
So the man's responsibility is listed first. That feels significant.
It's a huge point. It emphasizes that moral control starts internally. Then comes the second covering, which is the command for women to physically cover themselves.
This double protection is a preventative measure. It's a reciprocal agreement to protect the marriage.
And the risk, they argue, is when those protections are removed. They acknowledge that it's part of a woman's nature, her fitra, to appreciate praise for her beauty.
But if she's unveiled in public, that desire can be, well, exploited. She might start seeking validation outside the home.
And they use a pretty vivid social experiment from New York City to make this point.
Oh, right. The woman who walked the streets for 5 hours in a revealing outfit.
And the result was just a constant barrage of harassment,
Yeah.
being treated like an object.
But then the same woman, same city, same amount of time, but wearing a full hijab.
And the result, totally different. Nobody looks at her the way she's looked at in the first case. She becomes a person again, not just an object of attention.
And that, for the source, is the core of family loyalty. She saves her beauty for her husband, which gives him peace of mind.
And he, in turn, controls his gaze, which removes doubt from her mind. That double protection preserves the whole contract.
But the sources then pivot pretty powerfully to what happens when that protection fails.
Right. When the gaze isn't controlled and the covering is removed, this is where they introduce what they call the magnet analogy.
Which is really the bridge to the next part of their argument.
It is. They say when both sides ignore these rules, they attract each other like the two sides of a magnet. And those desires, now that they're not contained, can spiral.
Into illegitimate relationships, perversions, even crimes. The whole argument is that the true value of women gets ignored, and they start being seen only as sexual objects.
And while they're very clear that the blame is shared, both the man and woman are disobeying, they make the sobering point that physically and statistically, it's the women who have to bear the consequences the most.
And they back that up with some hard data. They point to general social survey research from 2010 to 2016 on infidelity.
The numbers are pretty stark. 20% of men and 13% of women surveyed admitted to cheating on their spouses.
So infidelity in almost 1 out of every 4 families in that survey. I mean, that's devastating for the family unit.
It shatters that foundation of trust, love, and respect. And they even cite another survey showing that most cheaters confess pretty quickly, which suggests the guilt just eats away at the relationship until it breaks.
Here's where it gets really interesting. They connect that moral decay directly to the specific consequences women face using CDC data.
Yeah, the numbers are, again, very stark. In 2020, nearly 500,000 abortions in the USA, with the source noting that 86% of those were from relationships outside of marriage.
And then in 2021, 1.4 million births from similar relationships.
And the conclusion they draw is that this places a huge, often solitary burden on the mother. And they also stress the mental state of a child growing up without a father figure. It's framed as a direct societal catastrophe.
From there, they connect this all to a decreased demand for marriage itself. They use a symbolic prophecy of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him.
The one about there being 40 women for every man in the end times.
Right, but they interpret it symbolically for today. They argue that men whose morals are corrupted by, not controlling their gaze, start to see commitment as a limitation.
Their standards of beauty get distorted by all those media images we talked about, so they're always looking for the next thing. They can't find satisfaction in one person.
And at the same time, a woman's fitra, her nature, is seeking that real commitment.
But she keeps running into men who are unwilling or unable to provide it. This imbalance, the source says, is the real-world version of that 40 women for one man analogy. The whole system is just thrown out of whack.
The whole philosophy is really summed up beautifully in that story about the boxer, Muhammad Ali, talking to his daughter.
It's a great analogy. He asks her, where do you find the most precious things? Diamonds, pearls, gold.
Deep down, covered, protected.
Yeah.
Hard to get to.
Exactly. Their value is tied to how protected they are. And he told his daughter that her body is so much more precious than any of that.
So she should be covered to protect that value.
That's the ultimate promise of the source material, that the hijab is this wise, logical commandment that just aligns with the inherent nature of men and women.
So what does this all mean?
Well, By putting all these pieces together, the psychological protection, the family structure, the societal data, the source is really arguing that the one who created humans knows their operating manual best.
And these commandments aren't limitations. They're actually the path to the peace and happiness everyone is looking for.
And that leads to their final critique, which is aimed at governments, like in France, that have tried to ban the hijab.
Their argument is that a ban like that goes directly against this innate nature, this fitra, and it restricts what freedom really means.
Yeah, they conclude that those governments talk a lot about freedom, but it's only the freedom of their own ideas. They're basically forcing women to follow secular standards instead of their own faith standards.
It's a very meticulously constructed argument from start to finish.
It really is. And that brings us to a final provocative thought for you to consider, based on what we've discussed. If the sources are right, that the pressure to unveil is often a reaction to external commercial pressures, how often is the freedom to cover seen by the outside world not as the personal declaration of peace these sources describe, but as a rebellion?
Something to mull over. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.